Welcome to the GRN, the Growth and Resilience Network, where every episode brings you targeted stories and strategies about professional and personal growth and resilience. The intent of each episode is to educate, energize, and equip you with information and hopefully a bit of wisdom to apply in your life and within your community. Hi, I'm Steve Piscitelli, and I'm your host, and I'm coming to you from my world headquarters here in Atlantic Beach, Florida. The National Center for Education Statistics a few years back noted that upwards of 11% of college undergraduate students reported having a disability. NCES also found that the number of children and youth served under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act was around 6.6 million, or about 13% of the total public school enrollment. Now, disabilities can include specific learning disabilities, autism, emotional disturbances, developmental delay, vision and hearing, and much more. The Individuals with Disabilities Act provides for accommodations, that is, services to assist students so they can access appropriate educational opportunities. Now, according to the Center for Parent Information and Resources, quote, "The key to success in the classroom lies in having appropriate adaptations, accommodations, and modifications made to the instruction and other classroom activities. These need to be individualized for students based upon their needs and their personal learning styles and interests," end quote. So today we're going to take a look at how the connection exists between growth, resilience, and accommodations for our students. And while there are laws and mandates that guide accommodation requests and approval, what happens if a student does not get what he or she needs? How can students advocate for themselves, and how can parents advocate for their children? Sometimes the process might seem overwhelming. And to help us sort this out, or at least begin to sort this out, today we're fortunate to have Elijah Armstrong with us. He is a junior at Penn State. His major is in education and public policy. And he recently did a stint in Washington, D.C. as a congressional intern. He spends a lot of time when he's not involved in activism on his campus. And for his cause, he contributes posts to various educational websites. His cause, in his words, to promote activism so parents can be involved in their children's education and to promote a sense of activism for the students as well. See, Elijah believes that the parents and students need to be accountable for holding their schools to be accountable when it comes to accommodations. And I can tell you, he speaks from experience. And he has a website, equalopportunitiesforstudents.org. So welcome, Elijah, via Skype.
Hey, Steve.
Today.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, it is a pleasure. This is fun, and I got technology all over the studio here today. We'll see what works. So tell us a little bit, Elijah, about who you are, and maybe within that, what's the connection between a light bulb and what you're doing?
Well, I think the briefest version of my story is in the fall of 2011, I enrolled in Stanton College Prep, nationally ranked high school, downtown Jacksonville. Yeah, I'm from Jacksonville.
Florida.
And yes, Jacksonville, Florida. Jacksonville, Florida. And I got sick. Very, very sick, seriously sick, and I was missing school during my junior year of high school, and I went to a neurologist, and the neurologist determined that I had epilepsy, and one of the things that was triggering this, which was, by the way, just caused incredible nausea, seizures are obviously something very serious. It caused me to go to the hospital constantly. And we realized that one of the triggers, if not the biggest trigger, was flashing lights, and that there were lights that were flickering in my math classroom, second period math classroom. And It was causing me to go to the hospital after every time I had this class. And high school's on a block schedule. So that's literally every other day that at like 11 a.m., I'm having to call my mom and have her take me to the hospital, and they'll put me on an IV. It was terrible for my body. It was terrible for academics. It was terrible for everything. So I requested that the school give me an accommodation, that I would be able to change the classroom or take the class online, or that they would switch the light bulb. There was a myriad of things that were suggested by me and my mother, and the school said no, that in their own words, that they didn't do accommodations for the integrity of the program, and that if I wanted or needed an accommodation, that I would have to leave the school. It just sort of escalated from that point, which honestly surprised me, because the school district at least should have known better. I believe that there are people who did know better, but the school district at no point relented in this, to the point where a few months ago, a lawsuit was just settled for $80,000, settled a lawsuit for $80,000 with Duval County. So that's how I got to where I am now. About 2 years ago, I graduated from Stanton and began advocating for not just students with disabilities, but for all civil rights, specifically in education. And that's how I got to where I am.
Well, and people can read about this online as well. Is that
Yes, there's a story of mine that goes more in depth. I wrote my own testimony on it. Education Post, Penn State Headlines did a story about it that was also more in depth, and also talked about some of the other stuff I do on campus. The Florida Times-Union ran 2 stories about it, once in 2014 when the issue was still going on, and then another story when the news of the settlement came out. So for those issues specifically, and I have all of those posted on Equal Opportunities for Students if people are more interested in specifically that aspect of the story.
Well, that brings up a question in my mind based on what you were just saying. When you run into people, and whether it's Elijah or some other student who is seeking accommodations, and you run into folks who who don't help, why do you think that's the case? Is it ignorance? Is it a bureaucratic response? Are the people overwhelmed, uninformed, uneducated, not trained, don't care, don't know? What is it? Have you found a common denominator?
Well, in my personal experience, the people that I've dealt with that didn't want to do accommodations, it wasn't that they didn't know, it's that they felt that it was tainting the system. They said multiple times that for the integrity of the program, that they were not going to accommodate. And that's just the idea that for any changing a light bulb or having the exact same class in a different room or any number of things would taint the academic experience is sort of, not even sort of, it's pretty offensive. The idea that a minor change that will have a profound positive impact on me and doesn't impact the curricula in any way is tainting the system because it's helping a student with a disability.
In your experience, are you seeing it elsewhere in the nation also? Maybe not personally yourself seeing it, but from your research and from your contacts and from your work?
It's not exclusively a Duval problem. If I said anything that implied that, I apologize, because that's misleading. I know people from school districts from many places across the nation who have said similar things. I have friends in Atlanta who have had that problem. I know people in South New York, people in Southern Connecticut, people in many, many states who have had similar disability problems. It's not just a Duval problem. I just happen to be able to speak on Duval more because I read the Florida Times-Union, being as a student from Jacksonville. I like to keep up on local news.
And you had your personal experience. If a student or a student's parents believe that that he or she needs an accommodation, Where do you think the first place to start? Where is the first place? Is it the teacher, the counselor, someone else? I mean, how would you advise students to navigate the process? Now, recognizing you're not an employee of the process, you haven't been trained, as far as I know, in the process of accommodation, but you have lived the process as someone who, or at least you were attempting to get a documented need for accommodation. So where would you ask people to start?
Well, a lot of this I know from my grandmother, who had worked in social work for well over 30 years. And the first thing that she always said, and the first advice that she gave to me and my mother, was to go to the doctor to get the documented proof of a disability. So that is the first place I would suggest going, is go to the doctor, say what the disorder is, what the illness is, what the issue is, and ways that it can help. And then after that, there are really many places you can go. You can go to the teacher or the counselor or the principal or vice principals, or most people in schools are trained to handle situations like this. If you just talk to someone that will listen, it's not a very complicated process. Schools are trained to deal with this. Most teachers have experiences with students with disabilities before. Most schools, same thing, have these experiences. It's not like you have to follow a rigid plan. It's really just making sure that you let the school know and follow up to make sure that they'll be responsive. If
you were superintendent for a day in any school district, okay, just make it broad, what would you do to address this issue going forward? You're the superintendent. The buck supposedly stops with you when it comes to issues of accommodation. What would you do?
That's a really difficult question, and I've been thinking about that for the last few weeks. And a couple of things. First, as a superintendent, you do have abilities and powers and control over schools. So I would go to schools where this issue is happening more frequently, and I would look at the policies and look at the training of the teachers and the vice principals and the guidance counselors and see what is happening, that there's this gap between what the students need and what they're receiving, especially if it's documented and the law says that something else should happen.
You did graduate from Stanton, did you not?
Yes. Yes, I did.
You were able to complete your educational program there.
I was not able to complete the educational program I was initially in. I was entered as a pre-IB student at Stanton, completed the pre-IB track, and then because the accommodations came so late, the accommodations really came at the beginning of my senior year. But IB is a 2-year program that starts in your junior year, and my junior year was a wash. I had to actually finish my junior year over the summer of my senior year. They gave me 9 classes to take, so I had to do all of my junior year work over the summer going into my senior year. And so IB was not an option for me, and I did lose out on that, but I was able to graduate from Stanton from the honors track.
Okay. All right, so we had you superintendent for a day. Now we're going to have you speaking to a parent-teacher-student association meeting, okay? So if you were standing in front of a group like that, the parents, the teachers, the students, many of whom may not have students in need of accommodations, what would you communicate? How would you communicate the importance that appropriate accommodations has a meaning for their students as well as the students needing the accommodations? That is, if you went beyond the legal reasoning, which we understand is there, if we go beyond that, how do accommodations make a system, a school, a community better? Maybe even great?
Well, to start from the most broad perspective, we want members of society to be as productive as possible. And I personally at least believe, and I think many people would agree with the idea that having people more educated helps them be more independent and helps them be better members of society. Like, I think, speaking of it in that broad sense, I don't know anybody who would want, in general, a less educated society. Like, the idea is laughable. So to help members of society that are traditionally more vulnerable, like if African American students were failing out at a higher rate, you would want programs to help them. So it's bettering all members of society. So to help students with disabilities get access to the highest levels of education that they can achieve, so that they can be the most productive members of society they can be, is at least in my mind, is a no-brainer. If by helping this group, we're uplifting society and people can contribute the most that they can contribute. From a more individualistic level and a more selfish level, I don't know anybody who in their entire lifetime has never dealt with a disability. I don't know anyone who has never, like, I had kids that went to school with me that broke. I had a friend in band with me who tore, I want to say he tore his ACL, but he tore some ligament in his knee, and he was on crutches for roughly 8 months.
Wow.
The injury was very bad, but he needed accommodations for that. Like, obviously, it's not feasible to now ask this student to go up the stairs when he's on crutches and has a torn knee. I don't know anybody who's never been too sick to do something important. Like, everyone faces this at some point. And the idea that it's just for, like, this one kid, it's for all of the kids. Like, if you tear your knee, and he didn't even, like, it wasn't that he was doing something stupid. It was a complete freak accident. He was playing Wii with his father and tore his knee and had to be taken to the hospital. Like, life happens. Members of the football team, the Stanton football team, competing, they went out every Friday, and oftentimes there were injuries that would happen. I was friends with kids that broke limbs, that broke their arms, that had fractured ribs, and I know another kid from the football team who had to have another knee surgery. And again, it's not feasible to ask that student who was competing in an extracurricular activity for the school to now have to go up the stairs.
And it's, as you're saying that, and you're saying it so, relating it so passionately, I'm hearing there's at least we would hope there's a sense of community, a broader sense of community. And you and I have briefly off mic discussed, and I've shared with you that when during my teaching career in the classroom, worked with students who needed accommodations, I believe it made me not just a better teacher, but a much better teacher, from empathy to just being able to communicate in a different mode at times, a different way. I was learning as I went with the students. I never saw accommodations as a reduction in standards, ever. I always saw accommodations as you've been explaining. Here's a student that needs a bit of assistance.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think another issue, and why so many people, because also when my first article came out, when the one that came out in 2014 that first described what I was experiencing in terms of trying to get accommodations from Duval, I had many students come up to me and my mother saying, hey, I've experienced the same thing, but I didn't want to speak up about it. And that's part of the problem, is that there's this stigma that, oh, you're just not capable of doing the work. Oh, you're stupid. You're just lazy. And that is so wrong. Like, the fact that my friend couldn't go up the stairs because he tore his knee doesn't mean that he's not a capable student. I mean, I'm looking at going to law school. I went to Stanton deliberately because I had the opportunity, and the IB program is one of the most rigorous high school programs in the nation. If I didn't want the challenge, I would have gone. There are plenty of other places I could have gone to.
And when you were going through this and attempting to get the accommodations, am I correct that there were some folks at Stanton who were attempting to advocate for you?
Yes, I can say that I can't think off the top of my head of a single teacher I had that was not very, very pro Elijah. Every single teacher I had was very helpful in being incredibly accommodating and understanding what my circumstances were, regardless of how very difficult it was for me. All of the teachers that I had were absolutely amazing.
And that had to be powerful for you.
It was great. And I remember hearing from, because I'm still very close with my band director, because I was in the band, the Blue Devil band, for 4 years, saying all the time, him saying that he was talking to the teachers, and the teachers were very, very positive about me, and that they didn't have a doubt that I could do the work. So that was very helpful. I also had a subset of students, some of which I was good friends with beforehand, some of which who I had never talked to and still haven't said to this day, that when the article dropped were just very pro. No, this is not what we stand for at Stanton. We believe that Elijah is smart enough to do this, and why would the school do this?
That's
there were
powerful too.
There was also another group on the other side of another group of students on the other side, which just speaks more to the idea that the stigma around accommodations needs to be changed.
Yeah, and it's and before we finish up, you did start a website. You founded a website, which
Yes.
might dovetail into what you were just saying. Equal opportunities for students. Am I correct?
Yes,
Okay.
equal opportunities for students.
Okay. And tell us briefly why you founded that site. What's the purpose, the core values of EOS?
Really, there are two main things that, really three, but two of them are kind of the same. The idea is that there are two real issues. The first is that people don't know what the laws are or what resources they might have. Like, I have a background in education. I'm studying education. My mother worked in education. My aunt works in education. Most of my family are educators. My grandfather graduated from Teachers College. And if I hadn't had that background and I hadn't had that familial support, knowing, okay, Elijah's complaint is legitimate, this is legitimately not what should be happening, I could have very easily not graduated high school at all. And is important. Letting people know what the laws are and what systems are there to help them specifically, and not just school-wise, talking about nonprofit organizations like I did an interview with the ACLU and the Academy of Hope in Washington, D.C., things like that are there to help unite and support public education. But it's important to know what it is that they truly mean when they say that. So another thing that Equal Opportunities for Students does is, specifically on the federal level, because I, being the person that runs the site, can't go to every municipality, but I keep track of the bills that members of Congress, both the House and the Senate, sponsor and co-sponsor relating to education. It also has the texts of the bills if you want to click the link so you can read the bills yourself. And so it's important when you go in and you vote in every 4 years, if you vote for the midterm, you understand what your congressman is saying should happen with our public schools.
And again, for the listeners, give us that website address.
It is www.equalopportunitiesforstudents.org.
Okay, so that brings us to, when possible, I love to have our guest leave the listeners with a call to action. Is there something else, Elijah, that you would want the listeners to take away? If they could only take away one thing today, what would it be?
The main thing, and I know this is going to seem like it's not what you would expect it to be, but that was one of the main things that I learned with my experience with Duval County, is just how important and how much power the school board has. And that if you have the ability, go contact your local school board members, find out what they stand for, and go out and vote in those elections so that you can have a tangible. It's easy. It won't take that much time. It'll take like 2 hours of your time max, and it'll all be spread out. It's not even 2 concentrated hours. Find out who you want to represent your school board and vote for them. Or if you don't find any of the candidates that you like, run yourself. But the point is, make sure that there are good people and people that really stand for the rights of all students in your local school boards.
So it's stay informed. Get
Absolutely.
Involved, understand the issue. It's even listening to a podcast like this. They hear Elijah's take on what happened. This happened to you. This is your reporting of it, and you'd say, "Okay, read the reports on it."
Most do post transcripts online and send out. Most school boards send out emails, like listservs about the things that they're covering and how people voted, and
right. Sometimes
they also have public meetings.
Yeah, sometimes they're live streamed on their local websites. So there are lots of ways to get involved and to research all sides of an issue. So listen, you probably have to get back and start doing some homework. I mean, this is the beginning of a semester.
Yeah, I do. The semester just started. Not even through my first week yet.
Listen, Elijah, we really appreciate it, and I do, that you took the time to share. You are obviously a passionate man about this, a passionate citizen. You want to see the community, everybody in the community, be functioning members and be treated fairly. And when accommodations are needed, that the accommodations are granted. And learning how to advocate for oneself, and you do it very passionately. So I thank you for taking the time today.
I appreciate you having me on.
And folks, don't forget, visit my website, stevepiscitelli.com, for more information about upcoming conversations on the Growth and Resilience Network, and about programs and other resources for your personal growth and resilience. And while at the website, I made it very easy. You can sign up for my email and newsletter list, and I promise I'll never spam you. So until we meet again, either virtually or somewhere in person around this great nation, this is Steve Piscitelli from my world headquarters here in Atlantic Beach, Florida, reminding all of us, choose well, live well, and be well. Bye-bye, folks.